Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
When I was a kid, my favorite thing in the world was collecting sports cards. Baseball cards, football cards, basketball cards, you name it, I collected it. Now, my prized possession was a 1989 Barry Sanders score rookie card, which my best friend Mike DeCourcy tried many times, to no avail, to pry from my possession via underwhelming trade offers and eventually a failed attempt at a five-finger discount, which ended very poorly for him. Now, little did I know, the world of trading cards would provide an early education for understanding this burgeoning new field of the mysterious NFT or non-fungible token. A token is simply an object that represents something else. In the case of my Barry Sanders rookie card, the card itself is a token that represents Barry Sanders and his Hall of Fame level performance as a football player. Fans of football and fans of Barry Sanders want to get their hands on this valuable token or trading card. Now, since there was only a limited supply of Barry Sanders rookie cards printed, the demand of the fans drives up the monetary value of this card. What's really important to understand here, guys, is the community of fans are what give value to this otherwise meaningless piece of cardboard with a picture of Barry Sanders on it. So if you can wrap your brain around why trading cards are valuable, or any collectible for that matter, you will be able to understand why NFTs, non-fungible tokens, are exploding in popularity in the digital space and hold the potential to revolutionize the world the way the internet did over 25 years ago. 2021 was the year of the NFT. And you can't go anywhere in the internet now without hearing about it. But I was quick to dismiss NFTs because my first exposure to it was hearing about JPEGs of apes getting sold for $50,000. That made no sense to me. I was going to just wait it out and see if this fad would disappear. But it hasn't. And when I started trying to learn about NFTs, the other issue I encountered was my head started to spin. With all of these terms I didn't understand, like the blockchain and DAOs and Web 2.0 versus 3.0, centralization versus decentralization, it was all overwhelming and over my head. But when I finally started to find the right resources and have the conversations that helped me to grasp these concepts and see the enormous potential in the future of NFTs, it was like I'd walked through a one-way door. I could never go back. And the most influential person to waking me up to the power of NFTs is a very good friend of the show and great man mastermind brother, Brad Barrett. Now, for those of you who don't know Brad Barrett, Brad is the co-host of one of the world's largest financial podcasts, Choose FI. And the FI stands for financial independence. The FI community has helped millions of people get on the path to financial independence through planning, saving, and smart investing. I think Brad is an excellent guide to the NFT discussion because his roots in financial independence are conservative, prudent, and focused on long-term investing. And if someone as skeptical and thoughtful as Brad is in on the NFT space and is a big believer in it, then I trust that. And there's a lot to be learned here. So we wanted to do a very beginner level intro conversation to the world of NFTs so you can start your education journey on this space, and we can point you to other excellent resources like podcasts that Brad has vetted for you to continue your education from here. This is the first episode of a two-part series with Brad, and in this first episode, Brad explains NFTs in plain English, helps demystify what a token is, what fungible versus non-fungible means, why Brad was skeptical about crypto, blockchain, and NFTs back in 2017, but what he learned that allowed him to become a believer in this space. He gives a beginner level definition of the blockchain and quite frankly, it's the best and most easy to wrap my brain around description that I've heard about blockchain. How understanding trading cards and collectibles can help you to understand NFTs, a working definition of the difference between Web 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, and why Brad cautions looking at NFTs right now as investing. Rather, it's much more speculative because it is so early and it's truly to be treated as the wild, wild west. It's important to note that I have not yet taken the plunge financially into NFTs. I don't currently own any NFTs, which is totally okay. I'm still in the education process. Brad, on the other hand, does own what I would consider to be a substantial amount of NFTs, even though it only represents a very small portion of his net worth. So here we go, part 1 of NFTs, a beginner's guide with our boy, Brad Barrett. You know, Brad, we have a lot of friends of the show, of the Great Man Within podcast, but perhaps nobody has been a better friend to the show over the last 3, going into our 4th year now of the podcast than our boy, Brad Barrett, who is the co-host of the monster podcast, Choosify. He's been so gracious to open up his show to me. I think 5 times I've been on the show. We get a lot of our new listeners from the Choosify platform. A third of the men in the digital mastermind come from the Choosify community. So, Brad, it's always such a pleasure, man, to have you here in our community. And I think this is your 2nd appearance on the podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. I'm thrilled to be back, certainly. Thank you, gentlemen. And wow, those are very kind words, and it's good to hear. You've been a great friend of our show. And like you said, 5 times at least, I think. So I think you're the most frequent guest at this point.
Do I hold that title? That's pretty.
I think you do.
Okay.
I think you do. You're either 1 or 2. You're right up there.
Okay. I love to hear that. And we love the Choosify guys because they're already so intentionally living their lives in the financial realm. And so when they come over here, like the inner work concept is not at all foreign to them. They're already on that path. So thanks for doing what you do out in this world, Brad. And we are talking about a topic today that we know hits home to your heart, and you've got to be vindicated, man. I mean, you've been talking about NFTs for a long time now, including to me. You know, we've had conversations about it, and it's been bouncing off of me for months, maybe even a year. And then finally something clicked and we're like, wow. And if 2021 was the year of the NFT, and you're here to give an entry-level conversation to our listeners around why they should care and get educated on this realm now.
Yeah, this should be really good. I mean, I think, like you said about intentionality, that's kind of what we talk about here at your podcast, in our community. And a big part of that is learning, right? A big part of that is seeing changes in the world and being in advance of it and being nimble and agile and being able to make changes and change your own worldview. I am, as you know, a traditional kind of financial guy. I believe significantly in investing most of your money in index funds, low-cost index funds, saving a huge percentage of your income. Clearly, none of that has changed. That is the bedrock of personal finance. But in 2017, I thought blockchain and crypto and Bitcoin, it was like this made up nonsense that was going nowhere. To be honest, I closed my mind to it. That's not normally how I live my life, but it just seems so ridiculous. And then for whatever reason, about 14, 15 months ago, I got intrigued. About me explaining it to you kind of on our monthly calls, it bounces off until it doesn't. And then you see it and you're like, oh, wow, this could legitimately change the world. And I don't say that lightly. This technology could change the world in ways that are really hard to foresee, which is like why this conversation is both super exciting and daunting in the sense that hopefully we can get the message across of conceivably where this could go. But none of the 3 of us have any idea, right? We couldn't say with any degree of certainty, 10 years from now, this technology will look like X. We know what it could potentially be, but where that, and maybe we don't even know where truly how revolutionary it could be. So this is super exciting. There's something here. We can't close ourselves off to it anymore.
Brad, there seems to be a warm-up period or a marinating period between when somebody hears about this, they start to understand it, and in your words, you had the moment where it mattered. And it sounds like Dominic had something similar. You were talking to Dominic for a while, and he's like, yeah, gotcha. And then he's like, let's do a podcast about it, right? That's not the exact order of operations there, but like, what was it? What tipped you over from this is pure speculation and, garbage shenanigans to, wait a second, like this is a massive part of my life?
Yeah. It actually started by researching a little bit about cryptocurrency. I am not a crypto expert. None of this, mind you, is financial advice. I don't even look at this as finance at this point. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation going on. There's lots of people making money on paper, at least, and, making big, millions and millions. Like that's the kind of stuff you hear in terms of crypto and NFTs now. I'm trying to look beyond that and see like the actual substance of this. So, we will talk obviously some of the aspect of the money and the speculation over the next hour, but it's important that like I'm looking at this as technology. So for me, it was, okay, there's this podcast called Bankless.
Yes.
These guys are fantastic. They're incredibly knowledgeable. And I just wanted to learn because again, I was closed off. That isn't how I live my life. I'm not a huge fan of gold in real life. To me, I always look, and this is like my financial independence lens, is I'm looking for utility. I'm looking for things that do things. I'm looking for investments that have a return, that have cash flows, that kind of thing. So gold just kind of sits there inert, right? And maybe looks pretty depending on your vantage point. It doesn't produce anything. There's this old Warren Buffett quote that I'll kind of paraphrase, which is, would you rather have all the gold in the world, which would fit like a 64 by 64 by 64 cube or some such? Or would you rather have, at that point, this sounds antiquated, but 20 Exxon Mobils and all the farmland in the United States? Which would you rather have? And very obviously the latter.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a very long way of getting back to, I look for utility. So Bitcoin is the equivalent of digital gold. And this is not me ripping on Bitcoin. There are some potential values to that, and people are like fanatical about their Bitcoin. What I got into very quickly and what the Bankless guys talk about is the Ethereum blockchain. That's what's known as the second biggest cryptocurrency. But realistically, that's where, again, with the utility lens, that's where everything is happening right now. So that doesn't mean 10 years from now that the Ethereum blockchain is preordained to be the winner. I can't say that. I don't know that. I'm not implying that. But right now, today, virtually every company that's being built in Web3, and we'll talk about Web3, but in this new world is being built on the Ethereum blockchain. There are actual real world transactions going on the Ethereum blockchain, of which many of them at this point are purchases and sales of NFTs. But realistically, in order to buy 99% of today's NFTs, you need to have Ethereum. You need to have the Ether cryptocurrency. It's so interesting when you see a world and it's like, oh, I want to dip my toe into that. But in order to even dip your toe into buying an NFT today, if you were so inclined just to mess around, you need to do 5 steps before that to basically open an account, link your bank account up, put in US dollars, buy Ethereum, and then use Ethereum. So it's like, okay, this was an aha moment for me of this is not theoretical anymore. This is not Bitcoin, digital gold, just sitting there, somebody saying it's worth something when it was just made up in 2009 out of nowhere. This is like an actual economy that's occurring on the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah, so it sounds like really simply, you saw something that had utility, that there's an entire economy that's being developed, and you said, wait, what is this? I need to understand it.
Yeah, that's the most succinct way of putting it.
I've got a million questions based on what you just said, but let's start with the absolute basics of defining what is an NFT. These words, non-fungible token, are enough to make a lot of people's heads spin. So why don't we start with like, what is a token and what does it mean to be non-fungible?
Yeah. So I think if they had any sense that this was going to take off, that NFT probably would not have been the terminology or the acronym that we use.
Right. It's like the same guy who comes up with all the pharmaceuticals. It's like amoxicillin, that aphrodilacillin. It's like
just make it simple.
Someone needs to make a better name.
The fungible part is probably the non-fungible part is the easiest place to start with. So in essence, like we say that money is fungible. In general terms, like US dollars, money is fungible, which means any one can be replaced with any other. in theory, every dollar bill has its own serial number on it.
Right.
You could make a tiny little argument that it is non-fungible because it's specific. There's only one of that dollar. But realistically, every normal person considers dollar bills fungible because one is has the same efficacy as any other. Non-fungible is just in essence the opposite of that. It's a singular item. So it's singular. It cannot be replaced with anything else. And that is it. So that is what non-fungible means. Tokenization, and actually, Dom, you have a better definition of tokenization than I do. But It's in essence, we're turning items, and these could be real world items, into specific verifiable items that are defined. The ownership is verifiable on the blockchain. And again, we don't want to get into specifics. Let's talk about like a fancy watch, right? Like a Rolex. Right now, in any kind of super expensive thing, art or fancy watches, like you need some third-party helper or authenticator or expert to say, oh, this is real.
Right.
You could go down to, I don't know if they still, South Street Seaport and
Canal
find
Street.
the guy.
Yeah, Canal Street. They got the Fugazi Rolex watches,
for $5 and 99.99999% sure that's a fake. But what if you saw a fancy watch shop selling a Rolex? Okay, there's a little more belief, but how do I know?
Right.
You would have to get some even higher expert to authenticate them. Now, what if whenever Rolex produced new watches and they have a run of X number of watches, they produced that watch and they sold it, they could make it into an NFT. So now you think, how the heck could a watch be an NFT? This is a real world tangible thing. But it's because they created a token, which is the digital representation of that watch. So when they sell that Rolex to that original purchaser, the purchaser very obviously gets a watch to go around his or her wrist, but they get this digital token as well, which says, this is a Rolex. This was created on X date in Y manufacturing facility, and this is real. That's all well and good for the first owner, but where it really comes into effect is the second owner.
Right.
Because again, if all Rolexes starting in 2022, vintage and on, have tokens associated with them, then you can never sell an official Rolex on like the secondary market, if you will, without that token.
Right.
They are inextricably linked. They have to be, because it's the only way to authenticate that it is real. That to me is the best example that we can kind of wrap our mind around of, oh, I see now. And that's like a real world item with a token. They're naturally then are just purely digital tokens, but it's the same concept.
Yeah. And so let's take this a step further if we can. What's the difference, Brad, between, let's say 10 years ago, Rolex, say, issuing a release of 1,000 watches and then sending you a paper certificate saying, this is, watch one of the 1,000 watches, versus what you're talking about, creating a digital token and a non-fungible token that is then stored on the blockchain?
It's funny because I had this conversation with my mother-in-law, and she was a collector of like kind of rare and scarce dolls back when she was younger.
Yeah.
So she had the certificate of authenticity, and she understood conceptually now where this came in. But as we all know, pieces of paper can be doctored pretty easily. They can be photocopied. You can find, like, if people can do that with currency, they sure as heck can do that with just some random piece of paper that some random doll company gave you, or even a Rolex. That's the difference. There's no way to actually authenticate that that's real other than you're looking at the sheet of paper. Whereas when you're talking about NFTs and these type of tokens, again, with this Rolex example, it is authenticated on the blockchain, which basically this is tens of thousands or more computers that are all dispersed around the world, that are all essentially voting for the truth. So someone stands up in an auditorium, picture like an auditorium. I stand up and I say, I bought this Rolex from Rolex Corp on X date for Y amount of dollars. And there's 10,000 people sitting in this auditorium. And, picture old school, they're writing it down in their ledger.
Okay.
then it's not just one person saying this is authentic. It's 10,000 people, 100,000 people, and they're writing it down. Now, imagine they write it down on a computer system that is dispersed throughout the world. It's locked almost like an ember because everybody agrees on it. It's locked in ember in this chain of blocks, and that is deemed authentic. Okay. Think about that auditorium. It's not just one person authenticating it. It's computers all around the world. It's censorship resistant. It's not susceptible to attack unless like 51% of all these computers on a particular blockchain are attacked. So like it's very, very strong. That's the blockchain, right? But then even getting back to maybe what a lot of your listeners, like I'm thinking in terms, I said Rolex. Let's even go a step further that a lot of us can relate to is like baseball cards.
Yeah.
For men of a certain vintage, of which, we all fit in there, baseball cards when we were growing up were everything.
Everything.
And we had those stories of like our grandmas throwing out our dad's baseball cards and them like being aghast at like the Mickey Mantle was worth this, the, whatever card was worth that, Hank Aaron rookie card and Mickey Mantle rookie, right? So what did we all do? We all started buying these pristine sets, Topps 1986.
I was there.
That was the line. And I know you guys are nodding because I'm sure you have them too. I've got it in my basement. Yep. In the cellophane wrapper, right? The 1986 Topps set, that was that line of delineation for all of us when like we were old enough to kind of buy our own thing. And what happened was there were probably 30 million idiots like us who went out and said, oh, this is going to be worth something. My dad's Mickey Mantle card was, would have been worth $50,000. This is going to be worth something.
Yep.
Well, your dad's Mickey Mantle card is only worth something because there aren't that many of them.
Right.
To further double down on the baseball kind of story here, the baseball card story is there are only a certain amount that are PSA graded a certain quality. Again, that's the authentication. So anybody that knows anything about baseball cards, you really can't sell them unless they're graded and authenticated.
Right.
So there are X number of Mickey Mantle cards in 9.0 in the world. Well, you have no idea how many Topps 1986 sets there are. I suspect there are 10 to 20 million of them still left, something like that. So scarcity matters. Authentication matters. What if Topps put out the 2022 set? They might just do it digitally. They might not even have the cards anymore.
Right.
I don't even know if they still exist, frankly. But what if there were only 10,000 of them? Then each came with a token. And you could say with certainty, this is one of 10,000. Well, that's a whole lot better than this is one of 10 million.
That's right. But let's even talk about why do baseball cards have any value at all to begin with? Because it can't just be about scarcity, because you could say, well, I'm going to print 30,000 pieces of paper or 10,000 pieces of paper. I'll create a system where you know exactly how many of them are, will authenticate it, but those pieces of paper have no inherent value. So let's talk about why baseball cards have value or basketball cards. Let's use Michael Jordan as an example. Michael Jordan is a basketball player that we all loved. He was the greatest of all time. There are legions of fans, hundreds of millions of fans around the world who love basketball, who love Michael Jordan. So there's a community that exists that loves this man. And when a card like his rookie card is produced, everyone wants to own the very first card that Michael Jordan ever had, as a basketball player. That has like the highest value. And by the way, the card is a token of Michael Jordan. The card has a picture of Michael Jordan on it. It's not actually Michael Jordan. It is a token. It represents Michael Jordan. Now, the reason why that card has value, the only reason why, is because there's a community that says that card has value. There's enough fans that care about Michael Jordan, that want his likeness on a card, that then derive the demand of that card. And if you have a certain number, like Brad, you just described, where it's scarce, it drives the value of that card up. Am I hitting that correctly?
Yeah. And that probably leads us directly into this term Web3.
Mm-hmm.
You might have heard it thrown around, but you have no idea what that is.
Right.
Web3 is kind of what a lot of the experts are calling this whole new world. I know that's not very descriptive. That's how I'm seeing this. I'm seeing Web3 and NFTs and crypto as this revolution in the sense that of almost like a 0 to 1. Dom, I described to this to you on our call last time. It's like, to me, there was a 0 to 1 in the 90s when we went from no internet to internet. And then obviously it's ubiquitous now.
Yeah.
And now I see that with this technology of potentially having verifiable digital ownership of everything or anything. That's where this can go. And I'll get into some more examples of that. Web 1 was kind of like read only. That was the most primitive, the way back when internet, right? Like somebody put up an article, the New York Times put up an article. It actually looked very similar to what their paper looked like. They basically just like put it on the screen. And it was like, ooh, this is brand new and different. And it was amazing. But that was the most primitive of the internet. Then Web 2, think of more like the social internet. And that's currently where most of us are, is in Web 2, the Facebooks of the world, where you could read, sure, but you could write as well. You could be part of the social interaction. So now Web 3 is this next evolution of it, which is, it's all the bedrocks of reading and writing, but it's community, it's participation, and it's ownership.
Yep.
I know, like when you hear those words, sometimes I'm even like, come on, like, is this really real? Like, are we truly a community? Are we truly taking part in the ownership? And I mean, I've seen example after example of the community becoming part owners of a platform or a company. That simply would never happen. Could you imagine Mark Zuckerberg airdropping, just giving us ownership of Facebook for free, for nothing, because we were the users? There's no world where that would ever happen. What's interesting about this Web3, the whole ethos of this is it is all built around having community. And I know Tim Ferriss talks about Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans article, which is, if you guys haven't read it or anybody in the audience, go read 1,000 True Fans. It's essential. I've seen that with NFT communities. The very first one that I got involved in was this company called Pixel Vault. They just had some really cool stuff going where, like, again, I'm always looking for utility. I'm looking for like different levels of thinking. And they actually produced a comic book, which is funny. We're talking like baseball cards and collectibles and stuff. They produced a digital comic book. And that in and of itself wouldn't have interested me, but they wound up giving you different options. So it was like a game theory of, hey, we have this vault. And that was the Pixel Vault of a bunch of NFTs, very high value CryptoPunk NFTs. Basically, you would have this option to burn your comic book and turn it into something else, or you could keep it. So again, the details aren't that important, but it was just this really cool, like, next level of thinking. And what it did was they have this rabid community now. It's small. I mean, there's only 12,000 holders of any of their NFTs, even just one of them. But this has become such a powerful brand in Web3 that they just inked a deal with Adidas to be actually part of their comic number 2. They just got $100 million venture capital raise, at least $1 billion valuation of this company. They didn't exist in April of 2021. And because a small community of people were able to rise this company up. And now there's hope that they will return some of the ownership of this company to those original holders, which it's a sea change. So that's like theoretical. But
hey Brad, continue down that path. I'm trying to understand the community aspect of this, because I'm not quite connecting the NFT to the token, and kind of like, what was your ownership in it?
Yeah, great question, Brett. So in this case, I was a holder of their token. So actually, let's pivot to my next example, because that'll actually answer your question better. When you talk about the regular internet, there are domain names. So like I have choosefi.com. I'm the co-owner of that domain.
Subtle plug there, Brad. That was nice.
So right, I'm the owner of that. But when I pay GoDaddy, and I think ultimately like the ICANN or whatever the company is that runs that, I don't see any of that. I'm not part owner, et cetera, et cetera. But what's interesting is there are domain names on the Ethereum blockchain. They go by ENS, so Ethereum Naming Service. This company, they were creating these ENS names and taking in income, revenue in terms of ETH, actually, because again, it's denominated. Anything that happens on the Ethereum blockchain happens in Ethereum. And they were just moving merrily along. But what they decided to do actually was to tokenize the ownership of their entire company. And what they wound up doing was they said, our earliest adopters. So they took what's known as a snapshot. So they looked at the blockchain on a certain date and they said, whoever owns ENS names prior to this, and they further incentivize it. If you had registered for a decade, you got a slightly higher ownership percentage or whatever. Like they wanted to really incentivize people who were in this for the long term. They actually wound up giving a percentage ownership of their company to each of us. So I literally have ENS tokens. Think about it in terms of...
Brett, real quick on this one. 2 questions on this. Yeah. 1, why did they do that? Like, why were they incentivized to do that? And then 2, why does that matter to you?
Yeah. So why would a company ever give up part of their ownership? It's because when you have those raving fans, they start talking about you.
Yeah.
They go to bat for you. When incentives are aligned, like incentives are the biggest driver of human behavior that basically exists. When incentives are aligned, and it's not just antagonistic, like, do you have any incentive to make Mark Zuckerberg richer? Do you care at all? Do you give anything about Facebook?
I don't.
No, nobody
don't.
does,
Yeah.
right? Most people loathe him. Whereas it's just this ethos and this concept of incentives. That is the biggest thing that I've seen is like people start talking about it to the friends and they're not like proselytizing or BSing. These are our original fans. They deserve some benefit for making us successful.
I mean, is it happening right now, Brad? Like, so you're now a part owner. You're on a podcast talking about this. Anybody listening might have interest in like, what is this ENS thing? Whereas before, like, how often have you talked about GoDaddy?
Right.
So it sounds like you're kind of like in on this and you like either the people involved, the mission associated with it, or there's something that's like lighting you up about this.
Yeah. So, it was just a cool example. And, in full disclosure, I did get those ENS tokens and I did sell those tokens and I was able to get I think I got $5,000 worth of Ethereum. So it was free money, $5,000 just handed to me. But then contrast that with another one that just came out, giving some ownership of their platform. And I hope these examples are worth the time because I think it helps us understand like what's happening here. So I'll give this next example is the platform where you buy and sell NFTs is the biggest platform is called OpenSea. So OpenSea. That's just like a regular Web 2-ish just owned company. They are raising capital. They're going to have an IPO. This is what they floated. Like, again, nobody really cares about them. Their community feedback isn't that great. This is the general sense about them. Their customer service isn't that great. They're not that wonderful, but they're the only game in town. Well, they're the only game in town until they aren't. So a new company popped up that was created by some like real OG NFT people who basically said, we can do this better. We can do this better with incentives and including the community and being responsive. So there's a new platform called looksrare.org. They basically popped up out of nowhere. And again, because it's the blockchain, you can verify every single transaction that has gone before. So they were able to somehow scrape all the transactions and say, these are the people who have bought and sold on OpenSea over the last year. What they did was they kind of rank ordered it by how much activity, how much money you had spent in essence on there. And they gave a free airdrop of ownership of this new platform to the people who have been using OpenSea. So they call it a vampire attack. It's like we're like attacking this old brand by basically taking all of their users and giving them something of value. So I got a tiny little ownership of this LooksRare by holding that token. Instead of OpenSea getting all their income, they take a 2.5% transaction fee on every purchase and sale, and they just keep that, right? They're a company. That's how it works. That's how companies work normally. Well, what this LooksRare did was they said, okay, we're only charging 2%, and we're actually going to give that money back in dividends to all the holders of our shares. That's what these are in essence. They're shares. We call them tokens, but for normal people, think about this in terms of this is like having a stock share, a certificate of ownership, one tiny little piece of this. And no joke, every single day, I get a little dividend. So I get Ethereum deposited into my account because I am a co-owner of looksrare.org.
So let me get this straight. So you like a year ago or whatever it was, you bought an NFT on OpenSea. And that's it. You're like, cool, I'm hanging out with my NFT. I'm looking at it digitally. I'm doing whatever I do with an NFT. And then this company came along and said, hey, we can do this better as a community. I'm going to go through the top 1,000 clients of OpenSea, Barrett being one of them. I'm going to give him ownership of this, and we're going to give dividends back. So you're just sitting there with your NFT that you bought through OpenSea. Now, by an act of Web3, you're an owner of this other company who's now just giving you money.
Yes. As insane as that sounds, that is absolutely 100% true.
I see why you like this.
It's sense. Amazing. Community and incentives, ownership, these buzzwords, they're all there. Do I want to use LooksRare? Of course I do, because I get a dividend. Do I want to tell people about LooksRare as opposed to this stupid old stodgy OpenSea? Of course I do.
Brad's getting ramped up. I think maybe it's a good time for some breath work. So maybe a deep breath.
No, I love Brad when he gets fired up, man. Like he starts going, the knowledge starts spilling. You just got to get a pen and a paper and write it down as fast as you can. Let me attempt to give a rudimentary example of my own understanding of all of this, because I think what you're saying, Brad, is so crucial to understanding the power of NFTs. And I really want to delineate in this example the difference between community in this Web 3.0 world, where we all have ownership and a vested interest in building something that we believe in together, versus community in the Web 2.0 world, where like the Zuckerbergs own, the Twitters own these platforms. Okay. So Brad, I'm going to do my best here because like I'm a beginner, and then like come in and interject anytime that like I misstep. Okay. My understanding of Web 1.0, and I'm relying upon Naval Ravikant, who's an expert in the space. He's got a great Tim Ferriss podcast. I'm going to be linking in the show notes where I took notes from him. Web 1.0, right? When the internet first came out, that was determined that the internet was best available to everyone to build on. So they created what's called open source, where anyone could go and code on top of the internet. So it's available to everybody. And like you said, the example is in Web 1.0, really what was available was read-only stuff. An example of, New York Times just going online. Web 2.0, which is the next iteration of that, became what was called basically closed code. So Facebook went on the internet and wrote their own code, created this own ecosystem that they own, right? And when you become a part of Facebook's community, yeah, you may have 4,000 or 5,000 friends or whatever. That's kind of your community, but Facebook at any moment, at any time can change. They can change their ads. They can change whatever. Same thing with like Instagram. If I'm building an Instagram following, Mark Zuckerberg owns that. He can wipe away my thousands of persons following. Okay. Web 2.0 is owned by corporations. And like you said, every dollar that flows through Facebook, for the most part, most of the dollars flow up to Mark Zuckerberg. And so we create these big behemoths that own the internet, and more power goes to them and out of the hands of the users themselves, even though we, the users, are the ones going on and creating the value of Facebook. The very fact that Facebook is valuable is because there's billions of users on Facebook, but we are not getting our share of that in return. Web 3.0 moves to this place where Naval Ravikant said that it's now back to open code, right? Through the blockchain. Contributors own the platform. Like we are the contributors and we own our own data. Versus Web 2.0, like Zuckerberg owns our data. We are the data, and we become the ones who are commercialized with targeted ads, just like on YouTube. But in Web 3.0, it's open code. Contributors own the platform. And an example of that makes sense to me are video games. Okay. Now, I don't play a lot of video games online. I grew up playing video games, but, in the Web 2.0 world, when a video game manufacturer like, EA or whoever makes World of Warcraft, they create this video game. Lots of users flock to play the game. And then when they buy swords and shields and anything that they need to compete, all of that money flows up to the video game manufacturer in the Web 2.0 world. But it's the users who go in and create that community, who create the value, who make the game valuable. Web 3.0, from what I understand, is where the video games that are manufactured are now owned by the community. So the players go in. They are the ones who drive the value. They create, and by playing enough times, like the sword that they use becomes this like hyper valuable sword that when they sell it in the form of an NFT, the user actually gets paid for the sword that they created and made valuable. Now you have an entire ecosystem of gamers who love playing this game, who are now incentivized to make the game more valuable because they get paid when the game becomes more valuable. And all of a sudden you have thousands or millions of users who are now incentivized to play something that they love, that they also can get paid for. That to me, all of a sudden, instead of like one owner, the Mark Zuckerberg of the world or whoever created the video game getting all of the financial rewards, now the community reaps the rewards. That is revolutionary. I figured this would be a great place to stop the first part of our 2-part interview series with Brad Barrett on A Beginner's Guide to NFTs. In part 2, which will be released next week, Brad's going to talk about why most experts believe that 99% of current NFTs out there are garbage and will go to $0 in value. So if you're feeling FOMO right now about not investing, don't worry about it. This is the time to educate yourself. We're going to go into a beginner's level understanding of what smart contracts are and how they have the ability to revolutionize ownership as well as wealth creation in NFT space, and why NFTs belong to the creators, the artists, the musicians, and the communities that spring up around them into the future, and how you may want to get involved in one of those communities or to start a community yourself and build your own NFTs. So make sure that you tune in next week, subscribe to this podcast so you can not miss that episode, and we'll see you for part 2 of A Beginner's Guide to NFTs with Brad Barrett. Hey, did you get something of value out of this podcast? If so, I'm going to ask you a favor. Would you be so amazing as to go over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and a review? Your ratings and reviews can show someone who's just discovered our podcast for the first time that we are worth listening to. And that way we can reach a wider audience. So please head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review. You rock.